Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, a test prep person's analysis of the new SAT. Ben Paris inside higher education. Our question from a listener: how will the new SAT impact the test optional movement? Multiple people sent in this question. Our interview is TutionFit.org founder Mark Salibury explains what Tuition Fit is, why he started Tuition Fit, and how it can help families. That is part 1 of 3. And our college spotlight is part 3, which is the final part of our Understanding UCLA series with Sylvia Borgo, a UCLA grad and a college counselor. And she's interviewed by Mark about 6 traditions/programs offered by UCLA. And the UCLA interview will serve as the college spotlight.
You made it through that without fumbling, man. I know you're out getting off the graveyard shift, so I'm trying to get your last half an hour before you conk and get some sleep.
No problem, friend.
By the way, is COVID completely subsiding in the emergency room these days or not?
It's plummeting. It's still there, but it's not anything like it was. And hopefully we are on to a new paradigm where whatever happens next, we're done with this.
Yeah, I'm ready. Trust me. Sign me up.
No more mask mandates. Let's just keep on going with our lives.
I hear you.
If you want the vaccine, you get it. If you don't, that's on you.
You sound like my brother Norm. We talked last night. All right. So 3 announcements this week. One is next week by this time, you should have received your College Bound Kid Plus in your mailbox. So Lisa wrote an 11-page outstanding article on test anxiety. And in order to get it, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com. You'll see on the right side of the page, halfway down, a place for you to put in your first name and your email. And we'll make sure that you get our first ever issue, which we're very excited about. Secondly, you've talked about joining us on Twitter. Actually, I had a great idea this week. Someone went into Twitter and posed a question for a listener on Twitter. And I got to thinking, wow, this is actually a fantastic way to deliver questions for a listener. It's better for me. It's easier for me. You can still use questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. But I would love it for those of you who haven't submitted questions if you will just follow us at YCBK Podcast and pose your questions there. And if we get a lot of activity there, we'll probably roll it out to Instagram. Lisa's daughter Lily's doing a fantastic job at building up our IG page. See, I say IG, Dave, to sort of show I know a little bit of this terminology, even that Instagram's probably 10 years old by now.
That's right.
Make myself sound like I'm cool when I'm not. One of those things.
Yeah, I understand.
And then the third thing I want to say is, for our bonus content, which is something we send once a month to anyone who supports our podcast, we call them podcast partners. I've gone back and forth with this. We've been doing this for about 3 years now. And it's the hardest thing to come up with content because if something's amazing, I'm like, we need to share this with the broader audience. But I don't want it to be, so arcane or esoteric or just irrelevant that nobody wants to listen. So finding that right balance has been challenging. So what we're settling on, and I'm really excited about this, for bonus content is another in the news. Because, sometimes people say, isn't it hard to come up with content every week? I'm like, no, it's hard to pick an article when there's 5 or 7 every week, and you can't pick between them. So we'll do another hot topic in the news. That's going to be our standard format for bonus content, alternating between Dave and Lisa and maybe occasionally throwing a student in there. But that's what you can expect moving forward. And also, I'm really starting to put a lot of these other hot topics in the news out on Twitter as well, because there's 5 to 7 hot things every week, and we're only able to talk about one of them on here. So that's the format going forward. Now, admission tip. Virtual fairs, they are a great opportunity. You know, one of the big complaints I hear from admission officers is virtual fairs don't work. I'm in my hotel, I log in, and I'm just sitting there and nobody comes 45 minutes later. But what that represents for you, a student, is an awesome opportunity for you to come in and ask great questions, get answers to important things to you, build rapport. And so virtual fairs are an opportunity rather than be stuck in a long pack, to be one of the few people that actually takes advantage of them and to get some great one-on-one time, oftentimes with your regional admission officer. So I'll be talking a little bit more on my recommended resource on a great source for virtual fairs. All right, Dave, admissions vernacular. So I had this thought. In the spirit of test optional, I'm going to give you the optional choice of whether you want to guess at the admissions tip or not. You can take a pass if you don't like it, because I'm feeling a little sorry for my man over there. As we get into the 150 to 200 different one we've done, they're getting harder and harder, and I don't like seeing you squirm. So I want to give you an opt-out option. Take a pass if you want.
Well, in the spirit of adaptive questioning, let's just go for it. We'll get with that later.
You guys don't even know where he's going yet, but you will in about 5 minutes. He's talking about our article for the day. So the admissions vernacular is add-backs. You want to pass on that, or do you want to take a stab? Your choice.
Add-backs. I'm totally guessing. Let's see if the computer cuts me off in 2 seconds. Add-backs. Advertising, where you give the advertising back to somebody.
No, you got the back part, but not the advertising. So add-backs are tax breaks that you get on taxes, but not for financial aid calculations. So what happens is a lot of times people have their own business, or if they have additional real estate, then the net price calculator will not accurately capture that. Because everything is synced to your tax returns, right? And you're getting the tax break on your tax returns, and not just the net price calculator. When schools actually use your actual tax returns to calculate, they're not just going to go by what you did on your tax purposes. Another more common term for this is non-taxed income. So let me make it more tangible with an example. Let's say you have a home office and you're getting a home office deduction on your taxes. Well, financial aid officers will often look at that, and they'll look at what your profession you're in. And they'll make a judgment whether you really are using an IRS loophole to get a tax break, or you actually had to have this home office. And a lot of times they will deem that you did not have to have this home office. So they will add untaxed income back into their calculations and therefore ask you to pay more. So add backs are like adding extra money back into your calculations so that the EFC is not based on what your tax returns are based on. Was that confusing, or did you follow, Dave?
I sort of get it. I mean, bottom line is if they discover your hidden cryptocurrency account, they can use that to assess that, hey, you really can't afford this $70,000 tuition because you just made $8 million on Bitcoin.
Basically. Yeah, basically, there are ways that the tax code lets you hide money, but the financial aid office says, not really. Yeah, that's real money. You're just using a loophole to save on, and we don't think it's legit. So we're gonna ask you to pay a big portion of that for your kid. So that's the term, add-backs. I never really heard it used by financial aid officers. I mean, by admission officers. I do hear it used by financial aid officers. The most common term, though, is untaxed income or non-taxed income. All right, Dave.
Yeah, I was reading that Portugal is the last safe haven where you can actually make Bitcoin profits and not get taxed on. So all these bright people are moving.
Yeah, it's people like you, man, that get the ad backs on all your real estate stuff.
That's right.
Well, you dropped a little hint about what we're going to be talking today with your little adaptive statement. I'll drop a hint in the big number. The big number this week is 700,000. And what is that? 700,000 is how many less test takers there were for the SAT from 2020 to 2021. So it went from, I'm rounding numbers up here, 2.2 million to 1.5 million. So basically got chopped in a third. And it would have been much, much less than that. But what happens is that the SAT and the ACT have contracts. They have state contracts where it's administered in schools, as part of your state testing policy. And they've secured many states, and if it wasn't for those in-school mandatory tests, who knows what the number would have been. So when you drop 700,000, it's time to make a change. And they do believe in something I believe in. One of my famous axioms, if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always got. And they don't like what they're getting right now, which means it's time for a change. And that's a good segue into our article, Dave.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Well, the article is by Ben Paris, and Ben Paris is actually a tutor for the SAT. And he says in this article, a test prep analysis of the new SAT, essentially why he thinks that the new SAT is going to be still good business for test preparers. So the new SAT has several features. Number one, it's a shorter test, so it puts less of a premium on
Hey, Dave,
endurance.
can I throw something in before you start?
Yeah.
So Ben Paris has been doing this since like the early 90s. He's been around a long time in the game, and so he's really an expert. He worked for Kaplan way back in the day, and now he's still kind of involved. So he's kind of an excellent person to, let's look at this test and see what's actually going on and changing. So I just want to throw that back in. Sorry, didn't mean to rain on your parade, dude.
Yeah, no problem.
Cut your mojo.
Well, here's the deal. The new SAT is going digital, it's going to be adaptive, and it's going to be shorter. And for most test takers, that is good news, although a lot of people would prefer the old SAT disappear entirely. But there are clear advantages to the new approach, and they are, number one, the shorter test puts less of a premium on endurance. Number two, the test scores are going to be available much sooner. Number three, there's going to be fewer errors in scoring because everything is digital and you don't have to worry about bubbling out the wrong circles. And number four, it gives everyone access to a graphing calculator, so it's a real improvement in terms of fairness and equity. However, the big issue is that it is adaptive scoring. And what is adaptive scoring? Well, essentially, it is a type of testing where the tests ask you harder questions when you answer correctly and easier questions when you answer incorrectly. And they adjust their estimate of your ability along the way. So, this is interesting. Why adaptive scoring? Well, studies have shown that when questions are written well, that people can get a pretty strong indicator of your strength in about 20 questions or less. Some people even think 10 questions or less. So the SAT is promising to use some technological version of this adaptive scoring, but the details matter, and we don't quite know how this adaptive scoring is quite going to work. So here are some of the points that Ben points out. Some adaptive tests are so front-loaded that performance early on is much more important than performance later. And the application makes up its mind relatively quickly and doesn't change its mind easily. So bottom line is, if you get those first couple questions wrong and you dig yourself into a hole, he says, quote, you'll never get out of it. Alternatively, if you do better than you should at the start, even late mistakes won't sink you. Mark, I think this is goes back to when we were single guys and we met that date at the bar. And the bottom line is, if you
be
have
careful where you're going, man. I don't know if I'm going to like where this one's going to go. But go ahead. Take it. Let you finish.
Well,
I can always edit if it's too bad.
First impressions count. Okay. And if you go in there and you're looking like a slob, it's going to be awfully hard to change that opinion, even if you have good conversation later. So it's very important in adaptive scoring to start off strong, because the computer program could very easily X you out of the top score based on early wrong answers, even if your later answers are better. And it also talked about is that what to do with unanswered questions. And he gave an example of the early GRE, where early versions of the adaptive GRE let you quit when you wanted with no penalty, but the test maker later changed the scoring to make unanswered questions even more damaging than wrong answers. And so depending on how the SAT deals with unanswered questions can very easily change how difficult the test is going to be. But the biggest issue that he points out is that, quote, the adaptive format makes it much harder for anyone other than the College Board to create accurate practice exams. And, quote, how do you know how to mimic a test if the test maker doesn't disclose how it works? So the digital format means that the College Board has much more control over the number of released test questions than students can find. And so it's going to be difficult initially for students to get a good sense of how to do well on the adaptive scoring, because there's not a library of adaptive scoring tests to look for. So what does this mean in terms of test preparation? He's basically saying that as a test prep tutor, this is good news for the business, because people are going to be wanting any edge they can get to do well on this test. So people like him who actually have some experience with adaptive scoring and has access to as many of the questions that will be made available will be much in demand in the years to come as people adapt to this adaptive scoring format. And let me throw that over to you, Mark.
Once again, fantastic A+ job summarizing everything. I guess it's the episode for illustrations about girls, because I got one here I'm coming up with here in a second. But I want to say this is such a big development in college admissions, this new SAT, this new computer app SAT, that Lisa and I also devote our segment to discussing it from another angle, from a question that came in. So call this the SAT episode. But this is my initial illustration. So this guy, he's dating a girl, he cheats on her, and she's done. She breaks it off. And then
this sounds even more risky than my example.
I was thinking, who am I to say something to you? Look at me.
Sure you want to send this over to Lisa for editing?
Yeah, she might debate me again and arm wrestle me.
I think so.
So he convinces her to, with much persistence to come back after she breaks it off. And then he cheats again. Gets caught. She's done with him. And so now he's basically back on his knees. He's coming with the chocolates. He's got the 1-carat ring. He's promising the vacations. And she's done. She's had it. And that's kind of how I feel about this test, from the standpoint of, I really feel like it's too little too late and the ship has sailed. But I talk more about that in my segment with Lisa. Let's get into some of the content and what's going on here. So,
by the way, I like my illustration better. You're on your date and you have a booger up your nose and you just don't realize that just wrecked the whole thing.
We are really getting out there today. Let's rein it in. So a few things about the test. I just want to make I want to go over a few points, some of them that Dave mentioned, some he didn't, about the new test. And then I want to make one main point that I want to share and see what Dave has to say about that. So this is a complete digital overhaul. No more paper. Okay, it's a shorter test. 2 hours is what they're saying. Now, they haven't revealed yet if that's going to include breaks or not. Right now, the test is 2 hours and 45 minutes, but with breaks and introductions and everything, I mean, you can be in there for 4 to 5 hours. Probably not going to include breaks. I think that's part of the marketing. 2 hours. Laptop or tablet, if you don't have it, one will be provided by the College Board. Built-in calculator. The current version has no calculator. Built-in timer. Don't have to worry about trying to find some clock going in the back of the room. Built-in timer right on the computer. Shorter reading passages, getting rid of the longer questions. And And also, they're, apparently getting rid of a lot harder questions too. Math problems, less wordy. You're taking a different test than your neighbor. So this means you can take the test at different times for different kids. It's not like if you miss one big administration. It's a different test for different people. It does introduce potential new avenues to cheating, though. And it reduces transparency. You're not going to get your test back. In the past, get your test back and go over and see where things were wrong. No longer the case with this one. And how will you know if the grading's fair? So these are all questions. And then when we get to the adaptive, so the GRE made this change a while ago, like more than a decade ago. And first it was a pretty clunky rollout. In fact, for years, 8-9 years, they never had more than one or two kind of even samples for somebody to even attempt to try to practice the test with the GRE. But for the most part, it has been seen as successful. So here's an example of how GRE testing and adaptive testing can make the test shorter, which I think everybody agrees is a positive. So let's say I have a number in my pocket and it's between 1 and 1,000. And Dave, you need to guess what that number is. And all I'm going to do is say right or wrong. Guess what? Dave and I could be here for a really long time. He's saying 771. I'm like, nope. 213. Nope. 561. Nope. So with adaptive testing, it would be like he says 781 and I say lower. And then he says 235. I say higher. 517 lower. It's a lot faster. And that's kind of how it works, because it does have the ability to customize individually to the strengths or weaknesses of each person. The first group to take the test will be the current freshmen. So if you're a current sophomore, this will not relate to you because the PSAT will be rolled out, the digital one, in 2023. And then no more paper starting in 2024. So if you're a current freshman, this is going to be your gig. If not, sophomore, junior, senior, it's really kind of irrelevant, extraneous information. And it is interesting. The College Board's a member organization. It's a member-driven organization. So there's a lot of communication, surveying that goes back and forth between high school counselors and between college admissions people. And normally their big annual conference in October, which I like to go to, they roll out any new things. And so it's obvious they're going to roll out some changes, some tweaking. That just always happens. All they basically did is make the announcement now, and there'll be some tweaking. You can expect it to be rolled out at October at the annual College Board Conference. Now, this is the main point I want to make, and then, Dave, I'm curious about your thought. So my main point I want to make is that it's all about motives. What are the motives for the College Board doing this? And it's very, very clear to me several motives they have. The biggest one is what I preferenced in my big number. They lost 700,000 people. Market share. The new test optional movement literally threatens their bottom line. We did another. Remember before, Dave, we did a big number of how much money they lost? And it was like upwards of 280 million, in 1 year. So, yeah. So the main motive is we're about to be a dinosaur. We're about to be obsolete. So what can we do to address that? Well, let's take all the criticisms that we've heard about our test and see if we can address them. There's a lot of complaints about the fact that the test is too long. It's a big endurance test. It takes 5 to 6 hours of your Saturday. Let's make it shorter. That has more appeal. Look, they got burned this last time because of the pandemic. There were several months where the test wasn't being offered. That was a problem. But then even after it was offered, even to this day, people are having a hard time because the test relies on schools being able to be set up to administer it. They're like, we're never going to get burned by schools again. So we'll set up test centers. So not get burned like that again. People have been critical. What if someone doesn't have the calculator? They can't afford it. We'll give you a calculator. There's been complaints. This clock, I couldn't see the clock. It was in the back of the room. Now we'll put a clock right on there. And the biggest issue from a motive standpoint, nothing's bigger than them losing that many test takers. So let's say the second biggest thing. Big criticism of the SAT, and one of the reasons so many schools have gone test optional is they don't like the test prep industry. They don't like the multi-billion-dollar test prep industry. It just smacks right in everybody's face the difference between well-resourced and under-resourced kids. And that's been a huge criticism. For years, the College Board said that their test was not coachable. That's how they pushed back. It's not coachable. And then when it was so overwhelmingly obvious that it was coachable, then they jumped into the business and started making money off of that. So that has been something that has been levied against them that really they have a hard time defending. How can you justify this test that so clearly biases people of means and people versus people not of means? So what have they done with this new version? They have done something. Oh, I've done this. Here's an SAT word. Opacity. The noun opacity. The state of being opaque. The adjective version, opaque. What is opaque? Not transparent or translucent. Impenetrable to light. What they have tried to do is come up with a test that test prep organizations can't really prep for because it's adaptive. How are you going to simulate that and know the secret sauce? Only the College Board knows the secret sauce. So in one decision, you get to say you're pushing back on the test prep industry because how can they possibly prepare for it? And you're the poker player that has all the cards. You see, I don't know much about poker. I don't know if that works. You have all the cards. You're the only one that knows the secret sauce. You've got KFC secret sauce recipe. Nobody else does. And that gives you more power. And so that's what I see from a motive standpoint. Any thoughts, Dave?
Well, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I think the problem is that adaptive scoring tests are tricky. I've taken plenty of them in the course of my career. I'm sure you've taken a few, Mark. And as the author points out, they're highly, highly volatile. The fact is that the same person can take an adaptive scoring test on 2 different days, and one day he's just not having a good day, and he starts off slowly, and the computer program X's him out really early. And all of a sudden you found that your 2-hour test is done in 15 minutes because the computer said, no, you can't handle it, go home. Whereas the next day you start off relatively strong and you can have a completely different score. And the fact is that as the GMATs and the GREs have shown, adaptive scoring tests are extremely coachable, and there are certain techniques that really do make a difference in terms of your performance. And as this person clearly states at the end of his article, we're going to be more in demand as ever because it's new and it's scary, and people are going to want every edge, and we know how to provide it for them. So if the goal of the College Board was to find a test that was not gameable or did not need the services of test preps to give them an edge, I'm afraid that they're sorely mistaken.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. Like, test prep industry still will be in demand because of the unknown and because of the fear. And, Ben Paris, in this article, he actually says something. He said back when adaptive testing was originally rolled out and he was working at Kaplan, they noticed a strategy that people could just stop, and it would save time and they could move on to other things. And they actually figured out over time there were like same 12 to 15 questions being asked, and they actually approached the College Board trying to help them, saying, listen, we've kind of unlocked what's going on here. And he said, instead of being grateful, they sued us.
That's right. That's right. They were able to get, I always say that no matter what the subject level, there's always a finite number of questions you can ask. And actually, no matter what that is, that tends to be between 3,000 to 5,000 per subject. It's just hard to come up with questions. It just really is. And you do, at some point in time, run out. And it is just a matter of time before someone comes up with a database of your questions that they can then systematize and gain. For example, Mark, I just found out that one of the reasons why Jeopardy scores have been rising so significantly, and there's all these people who are like blowing the box out of Jeopardy, is that you can go online now and find a database of Jeopardy questions. And there's all these ways online that can help coach you through Jeopardy. And people are using these, and that the average scores of Jeopardy, the game has gotten significantly higher in in the last couple of years since Ken Jennings, because people have access to a more systematizable catalog of information and questions. Same thing's going to happen here.
I just had a flashback to, I don't know if we were like teenagers in high school or we were in college and we were back from a college break. But friends, we used to hang out all the time in Dave's, like the main family room. That was like the place we would hang out. We'd watch the basketball games and everything. And sometimes all of us would be there. And you have to understand, he has a big family. He's got 7 in his family. We have 5 in ours. And we would watch Jeopardy. And this guy over here was like amazing at Jeopardy. He would, we would sort of play against ourselves. He would like beat all of us combined. He was like a walking encyclopedia. So I think you missed your calling, Dave. You should have been the next Ken Jennings.
No. Either I've gotten dumber or people have gotten a whole lot brighter, because I have a hard time hanging in the teen tournament these days.
I think you've gotten dumber. You were a pretty sharp bull back in the day, dude.
I think these kids are much brighter.
But you know what? I'm really glad you brought up a really good point. So it's a very important point. So the College Board is going to make an accusation. How can the test prep people prepare? Because they're not going to see actual tests, and they don't sort of know the how point 1 goes to point 2. Only we sort of know that internal sequencing. But that does not mean, 1, there won't be a demand for it, and 2, it won't mean that they won't find a way to coach it, to provide legitimate coaching. And so there's a really big difference between how can somebody prep for this? You're not going to see all these sample tests. It's not a simple matter of like learning all this content mastery, because how do you know from one person it goes, because with adaptive testing, if people keep getting it right, it gets harder and harder and harder. I gave the example of guessing numbers, but in the terms of the test prep, you get the first one right and it gets harder, then it gets harder, like that. And so that's just a really important distinction that I'm really glad you brought up. And one of the examples I heard another test prep company use which is the danger a little bit in this adaptive questioning, because there's 2 types of adaptive questioning that are out there. There's item adaptive questioning, there's section adaptive questioning. Now we know the College Board has said it's going to be section adaptive questioning, but they're still waiting for a lot of the details. The example that I heard her use was, let's say, for example, the test starts out on algebra, and you just don't have a really strong, or geometry, let's say, and you just say you don't have a really good foundational understanding of geometry, but you're incredible at pre-calc. Well, if you start out missing those questions, you can get channeled almost into, like, for lack of a better words, into like the remedial section of the test, and you never got a chance to showcase your strengths in other areas. Does that make sense, Dave?
It does. I mean, my concern is that it's going to wipe out the semi-competitive middle, that people who are very strong at testing, who are very strong at their knowledge base, are going to ace up very early.
Yeah. So this is something that is definitely one of these topics that we will have to come back and revisit again, Dave, and see, where things are at. This is not a one-time only topic for us as a podcast. But I think we've handled the issues. Anything else you want to add? Because I think I'm SAT digitaled out. Friends, Dave and I had a great final summary to that conversation. It's just you don't hear it because he had tech issues. And so I want to relay to you the points he brought up, which I thought were really good at the very end in summary, which is that the test is going to be really volatile. And it's going to take 3 to 5 years for the SAT to norm itself. A 1600 now is not going to be a 1600 before. A 1400 is not going to be a 1400 before. And then we did also talk in this spirit and climate where people are moving to test optional. Are schools going to have the patience for that? Is the public going to have the patience for that? This has potential to actually blow up in their face. So we'll see how it all goes. But he wanted to emphasize that expect a lot of volatility and expect multiple years before it can be normed. So those are the last thoughts from Dave on this topic.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
What's up, Lisa? Are you getting the warm 70-something weather there we got in Atlanta today?
It is fantastic, I got to tell you.
Shorts, shirt, sun.
Yeah, it's well needed, I think, in February to have a little break from cold weather. So
No
I'm
regrets
very
on the
grateful.
move, are there, over there?
No, I just can't talk about to my Illinois clients
Sure.
and friends. I just don't even
Salt
mention
on the
this, like
wound.
it.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
But we can tell all our listeners, come on down. If you're thinking about making that move, it's worth it.
Yeah. I could say in July and August, then they definitely have the advantage of us. So
Yeah, and you're still adjusting to it here.
mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, we've got 2 questions today. Let's dive in.
Okay, the first one is from Susan from Virginia, and she says, I appreciated the long interview on financial aid, and I have a question I can't find the answer to. I know there are the federal limits for year 1, 2, etc., but if a student chooses not to take a loan in year 1 to 2, are they still limited to only the $7,500 in year 3 to 4? Or can they also take the amounts that they passed up in the first 2 years, keeping to the $30,000 max? I'm mentoring a student right now who will likely go to community college to start. He'll get the Pell Grant and a VA state grant and live at home, so he actually won't need the federal loan money for 2 years. But he will likely need more than $7,500 once he transfers, unless he's able to transfer to a school that's more generous with need aid. So, should he be planning to take those loans those 2 years and bank the money until it's needed, or can he wait and still have access to it? This question also applies to my nephew who is going to community college in a state where community college is free, but will still need loans when he transfers to a 4-year school and wants to limit the borrowing to the federal student loans. Love the podcast.
All right. Thanks, Susan. And there's actually about 4 questions in here. I want to unpack them because there's individual little mini questions within the bigger questions. And first of all, let me start by once again thanking Courtney and Michael for that fantastic interview they did. And here Susan is saying it was helpful to her, so we're grateful. So in summary, Susan's asking about the federal loan limits, the first question. And she's wondering, are the loan limits individual limits on a year-by-year basis, or are they a total limit amount over the 4 years? So the way the loan limits work, it's $5,500 the freshman year, $6,500 the sophomore year, $7,500 the junior year, $7,500 the senior year. So you max out at $27,000 over 4 years. So the answer to the first part of her question is that those are individual loan limits. So if you feel you're going to need the money in the future, and maybe not as much now, it could make sense for you to take it because you can't approach it. Let's say the year you need $7,500 and say, well, we really need $12,000 this year. It doesn't work that way. So does that make sense, Lisa? It's like an individual yearly cap.
Right.
So that's the first part of the question. I want to be clear about that. Now, actually, let me just go into a little bit more about how that works. Some others may be interested in this. So the way the loan actually works, it's an annual loan that you take out every single year. Now, later you can do loan consolidation and can combine them, but it's an annual loan and the interest rates come out on July 1st, and they change every year. So in the previous year, they were the lowest they ever have been. They were under 3%. The current year, they're 3.73%, fixed loan. And so that's the loan amount. And somebody who has a financial need, meaning that your EFC is less than the cost of attendance, you're going to get the subsidized version of the loan for most of the loan. So what does that mean? Well, let's just look at the first year, $5,500. $3,500 can be subsidized, $2,000 unsubsidized. Now, the exact same rate, 3.73 right now, fixed, that's the same. Also, you don't have to start making payments till 6 months after graduation. That's all the same. But the subsidized basically means to carry. And so what that means is that the government is carrying the interest. Or another way of putting it is if you took out $3,500 of loan as a freshman, then 6 months after graduation, your loan balance would still be $3,500 on that amount. There would be no growth in interest. The other $2,000 is likely going to be subsidized, but $2,000 at 3.73% is about $75 a year. So it's not a lot of increased interest. Now, there's one other thing that could be a bit tricky about Susan's question. So you cannot take out a loan for more than the cost of attendance. So when she says we may not, or not me, was it a friend she said, Lisa?
It's a student she's mentoring.
Yeah, exactly. So the student that she's mentoring, So one thing I'm not clear on, when they say they don't need the money now, that could mean one of two things. That could mean there's not a financial need at all now, or there is a financial need, but we have enough money to pay it. And the reason why that's important is you cannot get a loan for more than the cost of attendance. So if you're going to a school that, let's say, costs $3,000, and you're not going to be able to take out $5,500 because that exceeds the $3,000. So, and you might think, well, what colleges cost $3,000? Well, she alludes down, to community college. She said, the question also applies to my nephew who's going to community college. And then she says, in a state where community college is free.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that she can't take out that amount and bank it for the future when she thinks she'll need it because the cost of attendance is less than the loan. However, cost of attendance does take into consideration other things such as books and personal miscellaneous, in some cases even health insurance, depending on the school and some other factors, right? So there's a possibility you could take some of it, but not all of it. Is that making sense, Lisa, or any questions on that?
No, that makes I am actually following that. So it must be clear.
Yeah, because it's math.
I know. It's numbers. And I actually understood what you were saying. So great job.
Great. Maybe you're just sandbagging us and not being good at math over there. Maybe that's the answer.
No, I'm not. I wish I were.
Yes, because you're comparing yourself to your actuary husband who's like a math whiz.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he and my son are just like, they just look at me like, what's wrong with you?
They got the gene. Math's one of those things, you get the gene or you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can improve on it. And I'm sure if I did math all the time, I would get better. But it's
I don't
just
sense you're interested.
Well, honestly, it's like I try to think about math sometimes if I'm helping the kids with their homework, and my brain's just like, nope. And it just stops and it won't go further and I can't make it. I feel like I could do this if I could just push back past that nope. But
I hear you.
I don't know.
So there's one other thing I want to talk about in this question that it didn't come up, but I kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit because it did come up at the very end when Courtney and I were talking in the addendum that she did. So people oftentimes say to me when they're talking about this loan, they're like, well, what if you need more than that? Depending on the school, because sometimes people are going to expensive schools and they haven't done a lot of savings. This doesn't necessarily feel like a lot of money. And so without going over all the different options you have, just focusing on the loan aspect right now, because we could say go get scholarships or, look at less expensive schools or save or reduce your standard of living or pick up a second job. I mean, there's so many things, or look at home equity or a HELOC. I mean, there's lots of things we could talk about. But one thing that Courtney alluded to, and I want to kind of just set a little light on this because this can sometimes come up. So sometimes when people need a little bit more money, they go to look to do a Parent Plus loan. And Parent Plus loans can be deceiving. I don't like them, Lisa, but I've grudgingly come around to realize that in some cases they make sense in small amounts. It's case by case if people can handle the payment. So what people don't realize about Parent Plus loans is they do look at what's called adverse credit history, and meaning that you still do need to qualify for them. So they can show up on your aid award Parent Plus loan, and that doesn't mean you're getting it. You need to apply. You don't need a super duper high credit score, but you can have what's called adverse credit history, which is like one of 6 different things, things like foreclosures, bankruptcies, things like that you can have on your record, including being 90 days late on a revolving credit card is one of them as well. So what happens if somebody applies for Parent Plus and they get denied? Well, you can automatically have an extra $4,000 in unsubsidized loan. So you could take that $5,500 to $9,500, or if it was this junior or senior year, that's $7,500 to $11,500. If you wanted additional money, tried to get the Parent Plus loan, didn't qualify, and that's just an additional source of money that could be there. So that's all I have on this. Anything I didn't answer in here, or do you think we covered it?
Well, if there is, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you what it was. I wish the best of luck to her nephew and the student she's mentoring, and hope that they can get all the money that they need for their education.
Yeah. The last thing I probably should say, like, let's say you get this loan. It's through the Department of Education, right? So whatever. Let's just say you get, and by the way, you don't have to take the full amount either. So let's say it's $5,500. You only need $3,000. So the way that would work is it would be dispensed directly to the school, and it would be split in half over 2 semesters. So that's how they would accredit. They would send $1,500 for fall and $1,500 for spring. Hopefully that helps, Susan. If not, shoot us another email. We'll clarify it. I don't know. I sometimes think we get into the weeds on these questions. I don't know if we're like confusing or helping, Lisa.
Well, I think basically, I mean, what I got was that if you can't take out a loan that's more than the cost of attendance, and the loans get paid directly to the school. So you can't just take the money, not use it for tuition, and pocket it and save it for later.
Right. But there might be a way she can do what she's asking, right? So let's say the cost of the school is direct billable cost of the school that you have to send directly to the bursar's office. Let's say the bill is going to be $4,000 for the fall semester. And let's say what she means is we don't need that now because, or not we, but the student she's helping. The student doesn't need it now because the family has enough money to pay for that right now. If that's the case, then they could do what she's saying.
Yeah.
They could see what I'm saying? So I wanted to differentiate between they have the money so they don't need it now versus they don't have the money and it exceeds the cost of the school. So that's an important distinction. All right, let's get to our second question.
Okay, this question came from multiple people at the same time. So we know it's important and on people's minds. And it is, how will the new SAT impact the test optional movement?
All right, so I'm going to make some comments on this. This is a little bit of our this is a little bit of our new SAT episode because Dave and I tackled it earlier in our segment. And I know, Lisa, you want to say some things about adaptive testing before we call it a day. So I'll just be blunt. In my opinion, too little, too late. Too little, too late, College Board. That's how I feel. And, I first found out about the fact that the College Board might be making this big decision in John Bockenstadt's Twitter feed. John Bockenstadt, formerly VP of Enrollment at DePaul, now at Oregon State. I really like he has a lot of good stuff in his Twitter feed. He said, I'm expecting a big announcement in 12 hours. College Board about to make this announcement. So then they made it. And there was a whole bunch of talk back and forth from a lot of VP of enrollments in his Twitter feed. And I went back the next day and I basically said, here are my thoughts. Too little, too late for 2 reasons. One, a lot of schools like the fact that test optional is causing all kinds of applicants to apply that they wouldn't have gotten in their applicant pool before.
Right.
And they are not going to want to walk away from that. And the College Board changing the test, making it shorter, making it adaptive, making it online, use of computer, none of that is going to change that. So that's the first thing. They've tried it and they liked it. The second thing is, and this is something that I've heard from a lot of admissions folk this year as I've interacted with them, either in before info sessions, after info sessions, or before I record podcasts, or just talking with admissions people, that one thing they've really liked about test optional is that they feel like they're not being prejudiced by that number. That number really biases you as a reader. Like, I know for myself, when I was in admissions, it took me 4 years to not be significantly influenced by test scores because they're just concrete. And where things like essays and recommendations are subjective and squishy. And then you see that number there and it just you can't forget, it's in your mind. And many, many, many experienced readers will say the same thing. And I think I've shared this before, so for those of you who hear every episode, forgive me for repeating myself, but when I interviewed Lisa Prescott, who's been at UCSB for 37 years now, 35 at the time, this was before the UCs made the decision to go test free score, free test blind, to use your term. She's like, Mark, we're thinking about not using scores at all because we don't know if we can handle seeing that number and not having it prejudice us. And I like to share that story because of how long she's been in admissions. Mm-hmm. And it's really true. Like, you're reading an amazing kid and everything looks great and your school typically takes kids let's say, that have like a 26 to 30, on the ACT. That's like your middle 50%. Or, say it's like a 1290 to 1380 on the SAT. And then you see a 990 or a 1050, and it's just like sticks in your mind, and you start wondering, can this kid do the work? And so schools have been very pleased to not have that unduly bias them. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, I don't like when so many uber selective schools have already made the decision, like the Berkeleys and the UCLAs and Harvard, through the high school class of 2030.
Oh, my goodness. Really?
Yes. Through the high school class. I'm sorry. Through the college class of 2030. I'm sorry. High school class 2020. Sorry. High school class 2026. College class 2030.
Right. But that's Sonia's year, and she's in 8th grade. So
yeah. So that's a while ago. That's a while.
Yeah.
So they have said test optional. Do you know how hard it is for a less selective school to say, answer the question, Harvard doesn't need test scores. Why do you need them? That's a really hard question to answer. Like you don't get as many applications as they do. You're not making these fine distinctions between super competitive applicants. If it's good enough for them, why is it not good enough for you? So because so many of your competitors are just not going to go there, I just think it's too little too late.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really think this is going to be a bigger factor. Now, do I think some schools will use this test? Yes. We know Georgetown's going to do it, and there'll be a few others, but I don't think there are going to be very many schools mandating testing, especially on the private side. The ones that are likely to do it are your big state systems that have linked scholarships to testing, and that's what you have in Georgia and Florida. They've linked their whole big scholarship programs partially to testing, and they don't have the readers to read holistically, and they're the ones that are doing it, and I think they're under incredible pressure to change.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts, Lisa?
Well, yeah, I certainly agree with everything that you've said. I can't see how this new format is going to increase colleges' willingness to use the test. And I actually think that they're taking some risks because with adaptive testing, frequently there's lower rates of reliability. So that means if a test is reliable, like you test a kid one day and then you test them the next day and their scores are pretty much the same. But actually with adaptive testing, they find that the scores tend to fluctuate kind of wildly. They've been doing this with the GRE, and that's been a finding. And it's particularly bad for people who have test-taking anxiety because they are often more likely the first few minutes of the test to make errors that then the computer interprets as them not knowing it. And they never get the chance to get the more difficult material to get the higher score or make up for what they missed. So I feel like it's going to be, in some ways, less useful information, plus like if kids can take it 30 times, it sort of starts to become meaningless. It's just like who can prep for it, who can take it that many times, who gets lucky on what because all of the questions are so randomly presented, it's like who gets lucky on what's getting presented that day. I just feel like it's the less valuable test in terms of making admissions decisions.
Yeah, there's obviously there's some things to like and some things not to like, and I'm not going to go too much in detail on this because Dave and I are going to tackle that. Friends, Lisa and I are actually recording this before Dave and I do our recording, but I know Dave and I are going to get into the meat of the episode and get into that. But I will say this: there's certainly some things that are controversial about adaptive testing that I think are going to end up haunting the College Board. And, you know what? I'll tell you what. I know that the listeners may have heard this already, but why don't you explain what adaptive testing is?
Oh, yes. Okay. So adaptive testing occurs like this. So for the SAT, it's going to be section-based adaptive testing. So the computer is going to present you with the first section of questions. And based on how well or how badly you do it, it chooses another section of questions based on what it perceives as your ability level. So if you're not doing very well on the first section, then you're going to get I think Akil Bello call it the dummy-dumb second section. And then if you're doing, gangbusters on it, you'll get the harder material. So you have the opportunity to earn a higher score. If you get the dummy-dumb section, you're not going to have the opportunity to get the higher score. And so that is, supposedly it's supposed to be the computer's supposed to be very good at this. I just don't know. I know my kids did MAP testing when we were in Illinois, and their scores were widely variant from one trimester to the next. So much to where kind of just like mom, tiger mom kind of stopped looking at them because they were meaningless. They were not useful information. So if I'm not looking at a grade or a test score, it's not really helping. That's all I have to say. But I don't know. Maybe the SAT will be able to do it more effectively, but I have my doubts. And again, I think it does really prejudice kids with anxiety. And also, it's really going to be hard for kids to know how to budget their time. Right now, okay, maybe the harder questions are at the end. So I'm going to whiz through the first ones and leave a lot of time for the last ones. But here, you won't really know what you're getting. So you won't be able to budget your time. So I don't know. We'll have to see what happens.
So, a couple of things the article says. One, adaptive SAT scores will be volatile, meaning you'll see wilder swings in either direction. And it says if you botch things up early or get hit with the patches that you just don't get, you may sink and not be able to get back up. Well, that's not going to be very popular. I can tell you that right now.
No.
So that's one thing. Another thing, it says the adaptive format makes it much harder this is a really important point to me. The adaptive format makes it much harder for anyone other than the College Board to create accurate practice exams. How do you mimic a test if the test maker doesn't disclose how it works? The digital format also means the College Board has much more control over the number of released test questions that students can find. And, we haven't talked about this enough. I actually have an article ready to discuss at some point. But the College Board is... there's some concerns in some circles as to how it's maintained nonprofit status. I mean, some of the things that they have done, are straight out of pure corporate greed. And I actually have a really good article on that we'll probably discuss it at some point. But the point is the College Board is not going to get the benefit of the doubt that they're working on behalf of everybody's best interest from a financial standpoint when they created a test that only they can sort of know what's going on and it's hard to prepare for. That's going to be seen as a pure play for them to have more control and have more money. I'm sounding like you, Lisa. It's all about the corporate greed. It's all about their now listen, they do get bonuses. You can talk about it for them.
You bet your sweet bonus they do,
Do you know what David Coleman's compensation is? I'm going to roll that out at a big number next week. So I'll just tease it out. Big number on 2008. Big number on episode 214 is going to be David Coleman's compensation. People, get ready to fall out of your chair. Get ready to fall out of your chair, folks.
Yeah. No, the whole thing is just kind of, I don't know. I mean, I see why you'd want it on a computer. That makes sense. I can see why you'd want it to be shorter. That makes sense. But then you put in this adaptive testing, mysterious, patented secret sauce that no one can figure out. And you have no idea what they're doing. That doesn't make sense to me. And again, creating something that produces more volatile scores that even, poor kids can't even prepare for it, nobody can prepare for it. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and in fairness, I mean, there are some positives too, but I'll say that for my conversation with Dave. But I wanted you to bring out your perspective because I know you've had some experience with adaptive testing, and I know as soon as this was released, you felt really strongly about it.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what the ACT does, and I guess some people are saying that they're going to maybe go computerized but keep their current format, and it'll be seen. Then there'll be the safe test, and they'll get more market share. So who knows what'll happen next? Well,
there's not be fighting for very many private schools, I can tell you that, and not very many state. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like all the public schools are going to go back to the test, because we already have the entire West Coast that is test optional. I mean, every public school in Oregon, Washington, and California. It's to the point where a lot of times when I work with students out that way, they're having a hard time even taking these tests, because when the schools go test-free, score-free, test-blind, then guess what? Less administrations are going to be offered. It's less of a priority. So, but anyway, let's go back, and I'll wind back up to the original question. I don't see the new test changing the momentum toward test optional, test free, score free, test blind. I just don't. And I feel extremely strongly about it. And pretty much every liberal arts and science admission officer that I talk to, Lisa, that's in the part of a 1-year experiment, 2-year experiment, 3-year experiment, they pretty much all tell me, we know we're not going back to it. Like, it's not even the PC, well, we're going to have to see, we're still gathering information, so it's looking kind of promising that we may not do it, but who knows? I mean, they're just coming right out and say it, like, who's kidding who? Like, we're not going back to the test. So I think that's good news for most people.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, how it all shakes out in terms of who ends up really benefiting from a test score and who it doesn't really matter for. I'm not really sure how that's all going to play out, but I don't think tests are going to go away, but I do think they will decrease in profitability and importance.
And I should say something. I think it's good news for most people. I should be empathetic. There is a person that tests extremely well and is not happy about this at all, because they feel like they've kind of lost some of their competitive advantage, especially for schools that are score-free, test blind, And so if that was your strength and now it's not even being considered, that's not good news for you. So it kind of cuts both ways. And so I don't mean to be callous or insensitive to the person for whom that was one of their strong calling cards, and now it's not, especially at schools that are literally not even going to see it.
Right.
All right, as Dave and I say, let's put a bow on it and wrap it up.
Okay.
Friends, it'd be really easy in this episode that we've really dedicated to the new SAT, if you listen to what I've said, what Dave said, what Lisa said, to think, well, bump test scores. Like, it sounds like they're almost going to be obsolete. Everything is trending in the direction toward optional or test-free, score-free, test-blind. Like, why do it? It's a waste of time, a waste of money. I still want to reiterate, it is in your best interest as an applicant when applying to schools that are test optional to have high scores. Having high scores is better than applying as a test optional applicant. In some cases, there's a marginal difference in terms of your admission chances. In some cases, there's a pretty substantial difference, and we're still trying to suss this data out, and it varies from institution to institution. Some schools are pretty opaque, so it's not always clear. But as a former admission officer, I would tell you it's better to have good scores than no scores. Now, it's better to have no scores than bad scores, and bad is determined by the individual school and their medians. And it could even get more complex than that, because, of course, if you are meet an institutional priority for the school, there's times when your scores can be below average and still be good, depending on the school and the instances involved. But I just want to reiterate, I don't want people to come away with the impression, well, forget testing because it sounds like it's just completely extraneous. That is not the message that we are trying to convey. We're focusing more on, will schools be moving away from the test optional back to test mandatory? And I think there are not going to be very many schools that are going in that direction for the reasons that we have articulated. Hope that helps.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I think you're really going to enjoy my interview with Mark Salibury, the founder of tuitionfit.org. And in part one, Mark gives his backstory, and he's lived an interesting life. You're not going to want to miss it. He tells us why he started Tuition Fit, and he explains how Tuition Fit works. Listen and enjoy. Friends, super excited today. I'm here with Mark Salibury, the founder of Tuition Fit. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Mark.
Mark, it's great to be here.
Friends, you know that a lot of times with our thought leaders that we have on, I do one planning session, but with Mark, that was just not enough because we have so much in common. And so we just had to have multiple meetings to talk and really excited to bring him to you today. So Mark, why don't we start? Just share your background. Let people know, who you are, where you grew up, and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks. It's a very winding path to where I am now. I grew up in Minnesota. Grew up a Minnesota Gophers fan, and in the middle of the upper Midwest. And I had big dreams of being a rock and roll star when I was growing up. In between that and being a soccer player. And I went to college thinking that I would be a musician, and I transferred from a small liberal arts college out to a music school for a year, and then transferred back to the Midwest and spent a couple of years as a part-time student and playing in bands and living the dream before realizing that, I wasn't going to be a rock and roll star. And finally finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Minnesota. But I found very early on that I absolutely loved being on a college campus. And I'm sure this is a conversation you've had with students and parents over the years. When a student finds something that they just love, they'll do anything to keep doing it.
Yeah.
When I went back to the University of Minnesota, I discovered writing for the student newspaper. And as soon as that happened, I just was trying to be a student so that I could write for the paper. I didn't really care about my grades that much. It was just, I just want to keep writing because this was so much fun. And I really fell for being on a college campus. And when I finished college, I thought, I really do want to continue to be in education somehow. I want to be somehow connected to higher education. And I thought, well, I'll go and maybe do a PhD and become a professor. And 2 years into that project at the University of Kansas, it became very clear that I would be a very average PhD in American studies, which was the field I was in. And I started thinking about doing something else. And very lucky, total coincidence, I got asked to take over coaching men's and women's soccer at a small university in Missouri that was an engineering school. And it was called the University of Missouri-Rolla at the time. And that began a 10-year stretch of coaching college soccer. I coached at 3 different universities, mostly in Division I and mostly women's soccer, before, after about a decade, really kind of burning out in coaching. It's a really taxing profession, as I'm sure you can see most days by looking at whatever sports website you want. But as a function of that experience, I spent a lot of time with college admissions folks and financial aid folks. And that really led to how in the world does this college thing work exactly? This seems like sometimes it works great, and then other times it seems like it does not work at all. What is going on here? And how does it that all these faculty can kind of do whatever they want, whenever they want? I don't really get this. So I went back to school and I did a PhD studying how college works and how students learn and what makes for an ideal college environment and who gets access to college and who doesn't and why. And that led to the sort of second half of my career as what they call a director of institutional research and assessment at a small college in Illinois. My job was pull together all the data that we've got, report it to the federal government, report it to U.S. News, report it to the organizations that accredit the college, and at the same time, try to figure out how do we use data to get better at what we do. Sometimes the data was already there, and sometimes the data wasn't, and you had to gather it some other way. And that, I think all of those experiences together set up, one day I was thinking about what kind of data do we need to improve college access and college success. And it was real clear that actual prices were a really important component that was really missing from the equation. And that began a long series of nights thinking about how could we create that somehow. And eventually that led to the Tuition Fit project, which we're in our third year now.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, in my intro with Dave, I said I would come back and share a really good source for virtual college fairs. And there are quite a few, and so I'll probably have a few other recommended resources on this. But one I like a lot is collegeweeklive.com. That's collegeweeklive.com. It's a place where you can chat with admission officers or current students at a college or university that you're interested in. You can meet hundreds of universities and colleges there through their online fairs and chat sessions. And so it's an excellent opportunity to get your questions answered directly by admissions officers, to interact with students, oftentimes meeting the territory manager, regional admission rep that your child will be having their file read by. The other thing I really like about College Week Live is you can get a lot of great free advice. So they have on-demand webinars by thought leaders and educational experts in college admission. So the same kind of people that I interview are the kind of people that host 1-hour webinars on there, and they have a really nice on-demand library. So I recommend username, password, check it out. Something that's good for both students and parents. And it's a recommended resource for episode 213, collegeweeklive.com. Now return to my interview with Mark Salibury from tuitionfit.org. Really exciting, really exciting. You said a number of things there that resonate with me. First of all, I love the University of Minnesota. Just have a special passion for that place. And I've actually become pretty fond of Minneapolis, St. Paul, as long as I'm there in the warm weather. So my brother's daughter, my niece, she lives there, and we're pretty close. And excited I'll be there for several days in July for her wedding. So I love to go back there. I'm staying on the St. Paul side, staying on the Minneapolis side the last time I was there. So good roots. Another thing is institutional research. I'm always telling people, check out the institutional research page. That can be a gold mine on colleges' websites that people don't even know anything about. So, you've got that in your background. But what we're going to talk about today, which really excites me, is Tuition Fit, which you've started. But you're addressing an issue that we have talked about almost ad nauseum, I would say, on this podcast. You can't emphasize it enough, which is higher ed is, the only major purchase for, let's use the word purchase for, I know that probably is an insult to education, but that you go into and you're expected to buy in, and it's expensive, and you don't even know what the price is until you get to the end. It doesn't happen for cars. It doesn't happen for houses. It doesn't happen for vacations. Every other purchase we could go on and on and on. You know what the cost is, and then you can assess and figure out I'm in or I'm out. But this one strings you all the way and pulls your heartstrings, gets your kid involved, and then here's the number. And then oftentimes that number is even camouflaged when you do see it in cryptic ways on 8 awards. And so that's the big, giant problem that you're tackling with Tuition Fit. So why don't you just go into a little bit more detail about what Tuition Fit is, how it works, how crowdsourcing works. Talk to us a little about that stuff, Mark, because it's really important.
Sure. The issue that you just described is, on one hand, it's really complicated, and on the other hand, it's really not. From the perspective of the consumer, I just want to know the price tags of the things I'm considering, whether it's a car or a house or anything else. I just want to be an informed consumer, and I don't want to be the one that gets stuck with paying the full price and then the next day it goes on sale. Nobody likes that experience. And the issue is become even more important as student debt has become such a powerful problem in our society. Oftentimes, folks sort of think about going to college, sending their kid off to college as that's sort of the finish line for the teenage years or the finish line for parenting. And yet that same experience, that's the starting gate for adulthood, right? And the starting gate's on the other side. So a lot of times we kind of forget that the goal of this whole exercise for a family and for the student is not even just graduating. The goal is that the day and week after you graduate from college, you've learned a lot, you've grown a lot, and you have the financial freedom to pursue whatever passion you've discovered as you've matured. And we have a whole generation of people in this country who never got that chance because when they graduated, they were saddled with hundreds, sometimes close to $1,000 in debt every month that made it impossible for them to go be a teacher or go and try to work on a startup that they've always dreamed of, or go and volunteer in a community that really needed bodies and needed help and people that care about it. And so we've realized how critical it is that folks need to know real price, their real price, before they start shopping. And the Tuition Fit project really is a crowdsourced, build it from the ground up kind of project. We started with, wait a minute, everybody needs to be able to find out what would my price be at a whole range of schools. Ideal world, every school. What would my price be if I chose to go to that school? Yes, I've got to go through the application process. And yes, I've got to look more closely and see if it's a right fit. But before I do any of those things, it'd sure be nice to be able to say, okay, I know that this group of schools is going to be in a financial fit, that if I do end up going there and I graduate from there, that when I leave, I will be in a position where I could change directions. I could chase my passion, wherever that is. So with that in mind, the Tuition Fit project started with, well, where are all those prices? And could we figure a way to put them out into the public so that people could see them? And of course, I've worked in colleges for long enough to know that they probably weren't going to be so willing to share them. Mm-hmm. Surprise, surprise. But that the public has the data. The public's actually had the data for a long time, but they're sitting in each of the individual financial aid offer letters that students receive in the process of them trying to decide which school they go to. And of course, usually those offer letters are received pretty late in the process. Mm-hmm. But the family and the student has that data. What I also know from my work in higher education is that while colleges and universities often talk about lots and lots of different criteria that they use to decide on whether to accept a student or not, when it comes to setting price, it's actually a fairly straightforward formula. It takes into account the student's financial need, the family's financial status, represented by their EFC. Set aside for a second whether that's actually a reasonable representation of need, but that's the proxy that schools use. Mm-hmm. And then the student's academic profile. And when you get to schools that are very, very selective, mm-hmm. the academic profile part gets sort of squished together by the fact that they're so selective. So they're just taking students from that very thin slice of the upper level of academic profile. And therefore, the only thing that drives price at a place like that is need. But for the rest of higher education, it becomes really a two-way matrix. So if we were to be able to collect from every student and family that had one of these award letters, if they would just share with us their EFC, their expected family contribution, an estimate of that number, frankly, and they were to share with us an unweighted high school GPA and a test score if they had one, we could then say, okay, that college gives that price to this type of student. Get several thousand of those, zoom that out, and you would have what we have now, which is really, for lack of a better term, a sort of Kelly Blue Book for college pricing. We don't predict what your price will be, but we can show you what students like you are being asked to pay with the evidence to back up that information hundreds, maybe thousands of colleges all over the country. And as the data set has grown, we can now show that information to students really across the entire financial status spectrum and across the entire academic status spectrum. And so we just created a way for the public to share that information while protecting their anonymity and their personal information, so that when folks share information, we can verify that award letter is real and then redact all their private information. And we destroy all of the unredacted information that gets shared, so that the award letters are all anonymized, but we know the basic need and merit criteria of that student who shared that letter, put that all together in all the different buckets. And there you go. You start to have a data set that families can go and not get a prediction of their price, not get a guess with a caveat that like a net price calculator would say, here's a number, but we don't have to hold ourselves to it. No, here's what other people are being asked to pay. Put that in the context of the reality for colleges and universities regarding demographics and the number of students that are available to go to college these days. In other words, the numbers of students is dropping, and colleges and universities need students. So now the public has an awful lot more power to use that information to ensure that their list of schools is in the price range they need it to be in. And then when they get to the end of the search process, they can compare the offers that they've received with students all over the country like them who've received offers from sometimes the same schools, sometimes similar schools, and make better choices about what to do next, whether that's accept that offer and be confident that it is the right financial fit, or appeal or negotiate because it's clear that the price you've been offered is outside the bounds of what's reasonable and fair, or what you're willing to pay, and be a more informed consumer, and therefore be more confident in the college choice. Because at the end of the day, we want our students, when they start college, to absolutely believe in their very soul that this place works for me and I am going to go all in. And too many students have a voice in the back of their head saying, I'm not sure that I can make this financially work. And then that trickle turns into actions of, well, maybe I won't go try that one because I'm not really sure this is going to work. Or maybe I won't really look for a job on campus because, I don't know if I don't want to get too. And that sets up students to have less than the best experience that they can have. So if we can solve that one piece of this puzzle, we can really improve college access and college success and college outcomes for young people.
Awesome. I love it. There's a lot in there. One of the things I hope our listeners didn't miss, and we've been talking about this recently, is there could be someone out there thinking, well, isn't that what net price calculators do? And while I like net price, I like it better than it before, and net price calculators just came around in 2011, we know several things. If you heard my interview with Courtney Hatch-Blauvelt and Michael Ireland, one, net price calculators are estimates. Two, schools are generally not going to, they're not going to defer to the net price calculator when it disagrees with the more detailed assessment. Net price calculators do not take looking at full tax returns into consideration. And they are prone to errors in some, especially in 3 or 4 very common circumstances. And Michael Ireland and Courtney detailed those for us if you want to go back and hear that. But they do not do a good job with untaxed income, where schools have to go back and do what they have add backs. So they can be sometimes illusionary and disappointing. And I know as a counselor, I have seen at times they can be way off. At times they're pretty good, and the quality can vary tremendously from school to school to school. So what Mark's trying to do with Tuition Fit is is compile as many aid awards into a system, crowdsource that data so that you can actually see what is someone with your financial and academic profile, what kind of award do they get? Because as Mark said, it's only the most selective schools in the country that are strictly doing this off of a need-based analysis now. That is a very small percentage. Most schools do not have the stature to not have to give merit money to attract strong students. And so, yeah, there's a slice of the population that it's going to be completely driven by a need-based formula. But for the overwhelming majority of schools out there, there's a merit component that's built into an aid award, and your academic profile plays a role in that. And one nice thing that you're able to do with gathering these aid awards that you can't get in a net price calculator is net price calculators really can't take merit into consideration unless it's completely done strictly by the numbers. Whereas a lot of times you're actually seeing full aid awards. So if a school is taking holistic factors into consideration, it'll at least show up in the aid award, and you'll see, oh, this type of student got this.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, really excited to have Sylvia Borgo back from sunny San Diego, California. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, glad to be here, Mark.
So our regular listeners will recognize Sylvia did a college spotlight for us on UCSD San Diego, a campus that she's been on over 1,000 times, which is pretty awesome. And we're actually going to talk about UCLA today. And I know some people may be thinking, are you guys going to talk about UCLA forever? This is like the third part. So there's a couple of reasons why we're doing this. One, they get 168,000 applications. Okay, so any school that gets that many applications is extremely popular. And I know from my experience, I don't care where I'm talking to students from. They could be in New England, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, Southwest, everywhere. People are interested in UCLA. And as much as we try to highlight colleges with our college spotlights that sort of fly under the radar, we also notice that when we do some of the more popular ones, we get some of the best response. Second thing is you have to look at who's on your team. So Sylvia is a substitute co-host for us. We also use her for niche specialty interests and areas that she has. And she happens to be a UCLA alum and a passionate UCLA alum. And so you don't want to have that kind of talent and passion and enthusiasm and knowledge on your team and not take advantage of it. So, and Gary Clark was fantastic. He was great. We have a native Californian here talking about her experience. And so she's just going to add some things that Gary didn't cover, particularly focusing on 6 traditions and programs that UCLA have that are pretty special. So Sylvia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mark. I am so honored to be following Gary Clark. Absolutely enjoyed his interviews with you and the insight he brought. So today I'm going to keep it a little bit of fun and light for everybody. And I would like to highlight 6 traditions and programs, and I've placed them in the order of when they might have been for new students. They can be first years or transfer students. So let's kick it right off with one of my very, very, very favorite programs, and I'll tell you why at the end. UCLA orientation for first-year students or transfer students. It is a 3-day program that takes place probably as early as late June, let's say mid-July, actually, where students sign up for their orientation session so that they can go ahead and participate in a series of workshops and programming and to make them successful upon entering in the fall, which happens to be, by the way, third Thursday of September is when the UCs start their classes, with the exception of Berkeley, which is on the semester system. So back to UCLA orientation. It's a series of workshops focusing on student safety, academic expectations, campus life. That would happen mostly on the first day of orientation. On the second day of orientation, very powerful programming. You get to meet with your new student advisor who helps you with course planning and helps you register for classes. And the day usually ends with usually a social event to build community among the students. I believe it's about 12, 13, 15 students per advisor. Back in the day, I was an orientation counselor back in the early 90s. And we ended that day with musical performances and skits and just some fun for everybody. And day 3 of the UCLA orientation program, new student program, focuses on individual growth, provides programming on transitioning to college. Many workshops are centered around tips and advice given to students on how to remain healthy and make positive choices on campus. And it's the final moment is when orientation counselors, new student advisors get to take their students on a 3-hour campus tour, introducing them not only to the campus, the resource centers, key offices like financial aid, academic support programs, but we get to introduce them, or rather, the orientation counselors get to introduce them to UCLA history, traditions, and the lore of the campus. And that, of course, is to build the Bruin spirit. And the reason why I love the orientation program so very much is because it really was a transformative summer for me. And I met the most wonderful, most amazing people that I am still incredibly close friends with. They were also orientation counselors and orientation office staff.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I know transfers and first year students, and we know Gary said basically 1/3 of new students at UCLA are transfer students.
That's
So do they sort of have their own separate process, or is everything all part of like one giant sort of standardized process for everybody?
Yes. So we have the orientation counselors / new student advisors. We have the specialists. So you're either focusing on transitioning the first year students who have very specific needs and academic background. And then we have the transfer student specialists. Yeah. So back then they were broken up into those teams.
Awesome.
The next excellent program we're still in the summer here. So the next excellent program that happens during the summer is the freshman and transfer summer programs, which are facilitated by the academic advising program. And the academic advising program is hosted by the academic advancement team that provides support to multiracial, first-gen, low-income, or historically underrepresented students. A little bit about the program, the Academic Advancement Program, AAP for short. The services include tutoring, career counseling, grad school and professional school counseling, scholarships and research opportunities, and stipends even. I was actually an AAP tutor myself back in the day. When you are successful in a program, classes, you get a chance to tutor them as a junior and senior, as an upperclassman. And I also received these services as well, being first gen and low income and historically underrepresented. I was all three.
You checked all the boxes.
I checked them all. So I actually, funny story, when I was part of this freshman summer program, I was commuting from my home in LA. I really only lived about 8 to 10 miles away from the UCLA campus. And I was just so enamored by, I lived in a very urban part of Los Angeles. So I was very enamored by the incredibly gorgeous campus, trees and squirrels and birds and, every imaginable woodland creature was available on the campus. No, I'm just stretching the truth there. But I got bit by a squirrel my third day. Here I was. So I was eating
fun.
No, I was eating granola and I decided, oh, look at this cute little squirrel. I'll go ahead and feed it. Big mistake. I had to get a tetanus shot. So that's what my urban kid, what did I know? So, but back to the program, the summer program. The freshman and transfer summer program is absolutely fabulous. It allows students to enroll in 3 courses during the summer before starting UCLA. And these 3 courses meet graduation requirements. The students are encouraged to live on campus, but commuters are welcome as well. During the week, Monday through Friday, you take classes, you go to tutoring, you meet with the professors for those 3 classes that you're taking. And in the evenings or on the weekends, you can participate in social events, movie nights, walking down to Westwood, getting a cookie from Dee Dee Reese. I know Gary Clark mentioned that is a big tradition. And then, of course, exploring Los Angeles if you can get on a bus, or I guess now kids take Uber. But you could go to the Hollywood Walk of Fame or trip to the beach. And those are facilitated and encouraged by the counseling team during the summer. So it's an absolutely fantastic program. It gives you a leg up. It allows you to see what campus life, college life courses will be like even before you get to your fall semester classes, fall quarter classes. So now, speaking of the fall, we are moving to the very exciting week in November, usually around Thanksgiving. Any guesses, Mark?
Homecoming?
Close-ish. It is called Beat SC Week. So the big rivalry with USC.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
But it's not a football game, though, against them. That's not part of it?
Well, yes, that the culminating event is the football game on Saturday.
Right.
But before that, a week of fun and goodwill is planned right before the event. It's a week of spirit building on campus with rallies, a bonfire, concerts, if possible. But yet, I wanted to highlight that the competition is more than just fun and social events. There's a lot of great community building occurring during that week. For example, UCLA and USC go head to head with a blood drive campaign where students, community members, alumni can head to the respective hospitals for the universities to donate blood and platelets. There's also a blue and gold challenge that encourages students, alumni, community members to fund programs on the campus. And you can donate as little as $2 or, much more if you would like. But a program, the Blue and Gold Challenge, will fund programs such as scholarships, other library programs, and that's a great event to just raise awareness and fundraise for some of the programs that mean a lot to students. And then, of course, like you mentioned, the big game happens on a Saturday, and whoever wins the game brings home the victory bell to live on the campus for the year. And it is either painted Bruin blue, that baby blue color, or if it goes to USC, it is painted cardinal and it lives on that campus for a year.
Was there any cross socialization, do you feel, between USC and UCLA? Or is it sort of like they're the enemy?
There was none. No, just teasing. Actually, not many of my friends listen to this podcast because most of them don't have college age. Well, actually they do. But anyway, one of my very dearest friends, fantastic friend. He actually did go to USC, but I have to say he hung out with us in Westwood a heck of a lot. So that's what it was. So, now we are in December and it's students are about to take finals. So the next tradition number 4 is the Midnight Yell. And the Midnight Yell is a 5-day event that happens at midnight, of course. And it begins on a Sunday, the Sunday before the finals. And what happens right at midnight is people will not only yell from their dorms or from campus or from the study halls or the libraries, but people have also gotten creative. You can hear opera singers singing. People can blast their music. I won't mention any names, but someone that I know played their trumpet. Another person played their cello during Midnight Yell. So it's really just about a minute of noise right at midnight. And that's so that everybody can let out their collective stress at midnight as they're studying for finals.
And that's for 5 days in a row.
5 days in a row. I have to say Thursday's fairly quiet because if your finals are done on Wednesday, then you go home. And so a few of us were left there on Thursday evening. Another tradition is dinners for 12 strangers. And this is the only tradition that I did not have a chance to participate in, but so many of my friends did, and they talked about it as one of their highlights. So dinners for 12 strangers is exactly what it sounds like. It happens in February, usually end of February. And it's a themed dinner event hosted by alumni and on a rare occasion, also faculty or staff. And you're invited over to their homes where they get to cook a meal, usually themed like a Hawaiian luau or comfort food, whatever it might be. And this is a great event for students, especially because they get such a delicious home cooked meal away from campus. Last year was virtual. And this year, I believe the plan is to give students the option to have a hybrid, either in person or virtual again. So 12 people, 12 strangers, they could be underclassmen, upperclassmen. It could be, of course, the alumni or the faculty that are hosting them. It could be young and old. It's just a fabulous event.
So just to get some clarity, so the people hosting are either faculty or alumni, and
Usually, yes.
they're hosting students.
Exactly.
So students are either getting to know an alumni or a faculty. That's pretty cool. I like this tradition a lot.
It's
How'd you miss that one? You missed the good one.
As you can imagine, it's very popular. So for whatever reason, you had not to be selected, but rather it was just a matter of like who's available, what night, what part of town are you willing to go to, and it was tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, I would love to hear from any listeners who participated in this. Feel free to send me an email and tell me your wonderful story. Two more traditions. Spring Sing. We are now looking at May on the calendar, and Spring Sing is a tradition that has been going on for decades. I think since the mid-40s, Spring Sing was initiated. And you might think that it's only people singing, but actually it's a celebration of any kind of performance, and it's open to all Bruins, students, faculty, staff. It's mostly made up of students, but you can see singing, dancing, stand-up, comedy sketches, dramatic sketches. You have instrumental music, you have bands, you have drumming circles, or any combination of the above. It's really just a celebration of performance, more opportunities to build community. I was going to say that everyone there was incredibly talented, the performing groups, but I did actually participate. So the talent bar back in the 90s might have been a little low.
I don't know about that.
Maybe it was a bit on the goofy side back then, but the talent is just spectacular. It shouldn't surprise you. I know Gary Clark mentioned the music school and the theater school. So it is of no surprise that the talent on UCLA is off the charts. It has been virtual, by the way, the past 2 years. And that highlights, I mention that only because it highlights that nothing can stop a Bruin. It shows you that even COVID will not put a pause on orientation, which usually happens in person, or Spring Sing, or dinners for 12 strangers. The traditions continue. And I think Gary Clark mentioned that who is a UCLA Bruin. And really, I think we are doers. You get on campus and you serve others, and you make the most of your time there. You can be introverted, you can be extroverted, you can be quiet, you can be loud, but you do, and you do. So I think that highlights that even Spring Sing went virtual for 2 years. And finally, we're at graduation, the inverted fountain celebration. I'll call it a celebration because I'm not really sure what it is. I don't know if it's a swimming or a walking through or a dunking of, but it's an inverted fountain celebration upon graduation, after you take your very last final at the end of your UCLA academic career. You head on over to the inverted fountain, which is located on the South Campus. And South Campus really is it's not even a different campus. It's just like a different part of campus. And you hang out with friends, and you're just really taking off your shoes, taking off your socks, and putting your feet in there. If you Google it and you look at a picture, it's just a bunch of rocks. It's also called as known as the toilet bowl. The inverted fountain does look like a toilet bowl. And you just gather with friends and you play in the water, and you celebrate that you've made it through your time at UCLA.
This is great. A couple of things that stand out to me. One is, we talk a lot about how if a student takes 15 credit hours out of 168 hours in a week, that there's still so much more time. And this brings out a lot of the social side of a school, which I think is really important, something that I don't think we talk about enough. I'm also impressed, not to say you're old, Sylvia, because I think you may or may not have had that 50th birthday. I know you're getting around there. If you want me to edit that, I can edit that out of the podcast. Do you want me to keep that in or take it out?
You can keep it in. I'm proud to be my age, getting close to 50, not quite there, but I absolutely celebrate every year that I've had.
Well, the point I'm making is these things went on over 30, let's say 30 years ago, at least. Some, you said, won't even go back to the 40s. And I'm impressed that they're still going on. You know, that's impressive to me. That shows that they obviously are resonating, or they would, get rid of them. My last question for you is just what, as an alum, and you reflect back on your experience, what do you feel UCLA gave you that either has impacted you to this day, or maybe it was, prominent or prevalent in your 20s and 30s? What do you feel you took away from UCLA that you'd like our listeners to know?
Well, this is tricky because I am here representing UCLA for this particular podcast, but honestly, you can find this at any school. And you've said this many times, and your guests have said this many times. It's not the school, it's what you make of it. Mm-hmm. UCLA is fantastic. And actually, maybe I could come back on another time and say who it's not for. I'll tell you exactly who it's not for, but I'm not going to taint this recording with those ideas. But I could have sat in my dorm, or I could have sat in the library and not done spring sing. Maybe I would have preferred not to do the midnight yell. Maybe I wouldn't have been an orientation counselor. It really is what you do when you get there. And so the UCLA was a perfect school for me. It was a perfect fit for me because I came from a school that didn't have that many opportunities. So I know, and I guess that just goes to my personality. I did want to do, and I wanted to participate, and I wanted to be involved and make a change and get involved. And since my high school had limited opportunities, I wanted a school that would provide that. And so I did choose UCLA, and it was exactly that. But once I got onto campus, I made sure that I did join the academic advisement program. I did take that summer class. I did become an orientation counselor. I did apply to jobs. I did my work study. So it's really, this can be had at any campus.
Good answer, but I'm going to challenge you now. So I don't think it taints UCLA by you saying who it's not for. I think it helps our listeners to discern whether or not that's a school they might want to look at or look at for their kids. And just in interest of full disclosure, I mean, we're doing 3 parts on UCLA. We're not coming back to UCLA anytime soon with all the colleges out there. So it's kind of now or never. So I would love for you to share who it's not for. And I don't see it as a negative because we know all schools are not for everybody. So it's in no way, shape, or form it's a negative. I think it's just a clarifier that I think adds focus to this UCLA conversation. So who would you say it's not for?
Right off the bat, I love Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles. It is not for the student who is urban shy. Los Angeles is a beast of a city. I know that sometimes you'll get on these virtual tours or these presentations and they'll say you can be in the mountains in the morning and the beach at night. And that is not true. The traffic is horrendous. Parking is expensive and horrendous. Once you move off of campus, it is expensive. It is very expensive. Back in 1992, 93, was that the correct year? Anyway, you get the point. I lived off campus 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was paying $500 a month to share 2 bedrooms with 3 other people. So the apartment was $2,000 30 years ago.
30 years ago. Wow.
30 years ago. It is expensive. Like I said, the city is a beast. It can wear you down if you are not used to that energy. It's just the energy of the city. In recent years, so Westwood is a beautiful little college town, and it is surrounded by some of the most expensive neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Beverly Hills, Brentwood, Holmby Hills, and even not too far away, Santa Monica, Culver City. Those are very expensive neighborhoods to live in. The most negative thing that I will say about I suppose, not even UCLA, but Los Angeles, is that there is a fair amount of income disparity. The wealthy are wealthy and they can afford these beautiful neighborhoods, and everybody else is not. And that is heartbreaking, and that is difficult to see on a daily basis. Somebody shopping at Whole Foods and driving their Tesla while you just passed on the street 6 or 7 homeless people. That is heartbreaking. That is difficult. I think that's the hardest thing about UCLA. On campus itself, I would say that you have to have sharp elbows. If you're a student that is perhaps still growing and maturing, is not really quite yet ready to advocate for yourself, and you have dull elbows, it may not be for you. You will be in a class with 250, 300, 500 students. And if you're not prepared to try to get there and sit in the first, second, third row and approach your professors afterwards, because maybe you're, like I said, still developing those skills, it may not be for you. You will be left behind in the dust. Can you still find support systems everywhere? Sure, your roommates, your dorm mates, of course, these support centers. But you will have to know how to step on campus and hit the ground running. So those are 2 things that come to mind straight away.
Sylvia, this was fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll be inviting you back again. In fact, Sylvia's a San Diego resident. She's going to be doing a University of San Diego spotlight for us in 2022. So you can look forward to having her back talking about a school that's probably, 10, 15 miles from you? Probably not that far.
Yep, about 10 miles away.
Yep, awesome. So thanks again.
Thank you again, Mark. Have a good one.
Oh, my pleasure. Due to Dave's tech issues, I'm your Next Week in the News guy. Next week in the news, how college applicants embellish essays with sob stories, fake patents. And it's our first time we've ever had something from the New York Post. It's by Isabel Vincent. A question from a listener: how do I know which colleges we should visit? Great question. It comes from Shelley in California. Our interview will be part 2 of my interview with tuitionfit.org founder Mark Salibury, explaining what Tuition Fit is, why he started Tuition Fit, and how it can help families. That's part 2 of 3. And the college spotlight, Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. See you next week, everybody. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer, who fixes all of our many errors, is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Boss. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.